Okay, so this is a pair of universal in-ear monitors, which basically means that they're designed to be worn by anyone, assuming your ears are large enough, and they use standard ear tips like this. Now, on the other hand, this is a pair of custom in-ear monitors, meaning that they're designed to the unique anatomy of your ear, and they cannot be worn by anyone, and there is a much more extensive process to getting earphones like this. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down my experience of getting custom in-ear monitors, as well as just my experience over the last 4 or 5 years of owning them. So I am an audiophile, but I think a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today also applies if you are a musician considering a pair of custom in-ear monitors. Okay, so step 1 of this process is obviously going to be getting impressions of your ear in the first place. And this is kind of where I ran into my first hiccup actually. So this was about 4 years ago, back when I was still in college in Santa Barbara. And I basically just went to the closest audiologist that I could find because at the time I did not have a car. And I think I just literally tried to walk there, if I recall correctly. And basically what I found out from this experience and later experiences is that not all audiologists are created equal. And this place, I think in particular, they specialized in hearing aids rather than, custom in-ear monitors. So when they took the impressions, I think that the impressions that they took were not the best. And because of that, it necessitated a refit of the custom in-ear monitor when it actually came. And so I'm not alone in my experience with this either. My friend actually went to the exact same place in Santa Barbara, and his custom in-ear monitors also turned out to be not a good fit when they first came in, and he had to get them refitted, I think. So yeah, that's hiccup number 1. You really want to choose a place that has done a lot of impressions for custom in-ear monitors in particular. And the other item that you have to think about here is logistics. Once you get that impression, you really want to get it out as quickly as possible to the company that you're getting the custom in-ear monitor from. And that's just because those molds, they're only good for a certain amount of time before whatever material it's made out of, it can sort of shift around. Sometimes you will get a 3D scan of the mold. There are some places that do that, like Zeppelin & Co. in Singapore. However, be aware that not all IM companies will accept, 3D scans of your ear impressions when they make the IM for you, the CIEM for you. So yeah, overall, just from the start, it's going to be quite a lot of logistics before you get your custom in-ear monitor in the first place. Oh yeah, so as for whether it hurts getting, those ear impressions, I would say not really. It's just kind of uncomfortable, especially when they put in the plugs initially for blocking off the sealant at the end of your eardrum. That's probably the most uncomfortable part. And then it's just kind of like an odd feeling when they shoot in the actual material to start expanding in your ear. Outside of that, yeah, not really painful, just uncomfortable. It shouldn't be painful, at least, if you get someone that knows what they are doing. Now moving on, just talking about this more from the perspective of an audiophile and the sound of the CIEM itself, you really should never expect a CIEM to sound like a universal in-ear monitor of the same make and model, basically. So, for example, looking at the 64 audio CIEMs, so this right here is a 64 audio A3T. This unit does not sound like the universal version, the universal demo of that same model. The reason for this is a product of insertion depth when a universal in-ear monitor is inserted in your ear versus a custom in-ear monitor. A custom in-ear monitor almost always goes deeper in your ear than a universal in-ear monitor, and that basically just shifts around specific resonance peaks in the treble, and in turn that affects the overall sound of the CIEM versus the UIM. And just generally speaking, when you have a custom in-ear monitor versus a universal in-ear monitor, the custom in-ear monitor tends to sound more bassy and darker. So as a result of that as well, you're going to lose out a lot of the time on perceptive technical qualities like resolution and detail. So that's just something to be aware of. There are cases, of course, where I think custom in-ear monitors actually sound better than the universal in-ear monitor. And a good example of that is the High Edition Viento. So that's an IM that I think was designed to be a custom in-ear monitor before it was designed to be a universal in-ear monitor. Basically, if you have the universal version, you're probably going to end up with a nasty peak at around 8K hertz if you can't deep insert the IM. And that's something that the custom in-ear monitor version of that IM is going to let you avoid. Now, something else that I will say is that not all custom in-ear monitor companies are created equal in terms of the way they do the actual mold and they kind of make the IM. And there are a couple of ways as well that you can kind of order the CIEM depending on the company. So 64 audio, for example, this is definitely more of a deep insertion with the CIEM. And generally speaking, I would say that 64 audio probably has like the best process when it comes to how they like clean the impression file. So they're gonna do their own scan of the impressions that you send them, and the way they kind of like shape that file and cut off little bits and pieces there so that it fits your ear is probably going to be the most consistent out of the companies that I've seen so far. Now, on the other hand, if you look at my Elysian Diva here, you can see that the nozzle for this is much shorter, which means that it's a more shallow insertion. So the benefit of this obviously is that it could be more comfortable if you are someone that doesn't like having stuff inserted deeply in your ear. But because the fit is more shallow, the potential of the seal breaking when you move your head around, you open your mouth, for example, it's just going to be a lot higher, that potential for the seal to break. Now, this might not matter if you are an audiophile, right? But if you're a musician, that's definitely something that you're going to want to consider. But even for me, even though I am not a musician, I would still definitely prefer the longer, deeper insertion with the nozzles, just because I listen to music laying down a lot. So if you lay down with the more flush nozzles, it's actually going to affect the sound just a tiny bit, even though the seal technically is not really breaking 100%. That's just because when you lay down, those nozzles are going to get pushed away from your ears a little bit, and that in turn is going to affect those resonance peaks that I was talking about earlier. Okay, so let's talk about the longevity of CIEMs and how long they actually fit for. And this is pretty important, I think, because these tend to be very expensive purchases, and obviously you want your CIEM to still be fitting like 5 years from now. So first, I'll share my experience, and then I will share some other considerations that you should have in mind. So for me, at least, my fit with my CIEMs has been still very good up until like 4 years later, especially with the A3T one with the impressions that I got in Singapore. With that being said, if you are someone that has, gained a lot of weight or something like that, there is a possibility that your CIEMs will stop fitting correctly. So just weight fluctuations in general are going to affect the fit of your CIEM. And something else to consider is if you are a younger individual looking to purchase a pair of CIEMs. If you are like 16, 17, 18, I would not recommend purchasing CIEMs just because, at that point in time, your body is still growing, and there's a possibility in a couple years from now that your CIEMs are no longer going to fit. And I say this from experience because I know someone that purchased CIEMs when they were like 16, and then like 2 years later they didn't fit at all, is what they told me. So something else you're gonna have to deal with CIEMs is the fact that, because these are inserting deeper in your ear, they're also going to be picking up more earwax and just sweat in general. So the amount of maintenance, like the cleaning that you have to do with them, is much higher than with universal IMs. And one more consideration that I'm gonna throw out there is that, if you want to protect I don't know if I would call this an investment. I don't really consider these things investments, but if you want to protect your secondary market value, CIEMs are not a good decision. And that's just because, obviously other people cannot wear these IMs without having them reshelled for their ears. So in terms of advantages with CIEMs, I do see a couple of them. One of them obviously is just going to be customization. It's a lot of fun designing your own in-ear monitor with like the designs on the faceplates and whatnot. And if you go look on some of these manufacturers' websites, they have a plethora of options. There are just so many ways that you can really make these IMs your own and very unique. The other big advantage of custom in-ear monitors obviously is going to be the comfort. It's designed for the unique shape and anatomy of your ear. So if they do it correctly, at least, they're going to be IMs that you can wear for like, at least for me, I can wear my CIEMs for like 9-10 hours straight with no issues. So yeah, for me at least, they're kind of my go-to when I'm taking trips and stuff, or in flying, or just on transportation in general. Really, really convenient for that. I do think that the isolation is not necessarily better than a lot of universal in-ear monitors, but this really depends a lot on whether you get that deep insertion or shallow insertion with the custom in-ear monitor. Okay, post-calc here. I just thought of something else, and that's kind of the question of whether it's worth getting CIEMs if you're someone that struggles with fitting universal in-ear monitors most of the time. And the answer to this, I think, is that it depends. If you have smaller ears, for example, and you want to purchase a CIEM that's of a higher driver count and that uses a lot of components inside, then it's probably still not a good idea because, at the end of the day, your ear is still just too small, and a CIEM is not going to fit, even though, they do have more space to work with technically just by being able to, move around the components within the shell internals a bit more. Now, on the other hand, if you're someone with a, irregular bend to your ear canal, and that's what's causing you issues with fitting universal in-ear monitors, that's when I think that, going for a CIEM has merit, and that might help alleviate your comfort issues. Okay, and I think that about wraps up my experience with CIEMs and pretty much everything I think that you should know if you want to purchase a pair of them. Do I think they are worth it? I really don't recommend them for a lot of reasons that I've kind of outlined in this video. I think that their cons generally tend to outweigh their pros, especially if you are a audiophile. Now, if you're a musician, I do think that the value proposition changes around a bit. And the reason for that being that if you're a musician and you're actually performing on stage and stuff, you're probably not looking to get necessarily the highest fidelity sound. And you can kind of make concessions in that department for better comfort and better possible isolation. With that being said, again, overall, I think that there are a lot of things that you should definitely keep in mind when you're getting custom in-ear monitors. And hopefully this video has given you guys some more perspective on the stuff that you should be thinking about. And yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in my next one.